Hey comic fans, Dave here at Ground Zero, talking all things comics and all things comics history. Yeah, in an episode we're still somehow remembered to call Interestingly Enough. Now, I know it's been an insanely long time since our last episode. Yeah, I got all sorts of excuses. You don't want to hear them. Suffice to say, we're back and you're still here. We appreciate it. But now, today's episode is actually not for all of you. Now, trust me, we really appreciate each and every one of you that watch these shows. But this particular one is kind of defined to a particular subset of you, not necessarily the Batman fans or the Spider-Man fans out there. This one is really just for the hardcore comics as an art form fans. So the rest of you, come on, there's great stuff on YouTube. You can move along, not waste your time with this one. So we'll wait. Oh, don't forget to hit like on your way out. Okay, are they gone? Okay, so now it's just us. Congrats, you're one of the really cool subset. Comics as an art form. Now, I want to talk about something that's actually going to be really important because it's something that's facing the comic industry that could really be a problem, and that is brand loyalty. Now, this episode will be less about history than I usually do, largely because we're living that history right now. Now, you've seen all the things that have been happening. I'm sure you've seen some of the news about DC Comics, about Diamond Comic Distributors, and all the changes that are really ravaging the industry. Now, a customer of mine was in the other day, and he was saying, with DC going to be obviously publishing a lot less books upcoming, isn't this an opportunity for some of the smaller publishers to come in and take up some of that market share, adding to even more diversity at your local shop? And well, like I told him, yeah, that would be nice. It would be nice to see an industry shift away from the big two. But one thing really stands in its way, and that is brand loyalty. Now, brand loyalty is a big part of comic collecting. I myself have brand loyalty. I love the Fantastic Four. I love the Legion of Superheroes, and I buy those books through all the different reboots, through creative changes, and everything that happens to them, because I love those characters. That's brand loyalty, and it doesn't have to be a bad thing. However, sometimes we take it too far, and it becomes an obstacle to growth in this creative form. Case in point, customers will come into my store and they'll say, Dave, I'm just burned out. I'm burned out on the X-Men. It just doesn't do it for me like it used to. I'm going to cancel my saver. I think I'm going to quit doing comics. Which to me is like saying, I'm kind of tired of pizza, so I'm going to stop eating. No, whatever you reacted to in comics doesn't go away just because you get tired of a particular character. The art form still survives. I will say to those people lots of times, look, if you really enjoyed what Marvel was doing, but now you're feeling like those have become stagnant, give Valiant a try. We love Valiant books here. It's much the same thing. And in fact, Valiant right now is what Marvel Comics was in the mid-1960s. A young, vibrant company with a lot of stuff still really fresh happening in their universe. You're there at the birth of so many new interesting things. And customers will look at it and say, yeah, I don't recognize the brand, so, no thanks. I'll stick with Spider-Man until I'm sick of it, and then I'll just quit. That's a problem because they're not willing to take the risk for the potential reward. And I understand this. My wife and I were in San Francisco many years ago, and we were hunting out bunches of comic shops, and so we found ourselves downtown, just right near the downtown area, away from the normal touristy area. It was lunchtime, and I wanted something to eat, and we were surrounded by all these really cool bistros and tiny little cafes and hole-in-the-wall kind of restaurants, all with exotic names and interesting smells coming from them. Now, I love my wife dearly. She is a lovely person. But one thing she is not is particularly adventurous when it comes to food. And so where did we eat in San Francisco, surrounded by all this cool exotic cuisine? We ate at KFC because she wanted something safe. She wanted something she knew would at least deliver something she was comfortable and familiar with. She was not willing to take the risk for the potential reward. And that's something that comic fans do possibly to excess. Now, understand, DC Comics is counting on that. Now, DC Comics is doing all sorts of things. And one of them is they've moved their new comic releases up to Tuesday. Why do they do this? Because they're counting on you to say, oh my God, the new Batman is coming out, and it's the 12th consecutive issue with a hot new villain premiere, and Bleeding Cool says it's going to be hot, so I have to come in and buy this particular book on Tuesday. And of course, none of the other books are out, so, well, okay, I'll maybe get those later, but then next week when I go in, those books are now a week old, and there's another new, latest hot book with a new character that's bound to be a big thing. So yeah, you see kind of what happens? DC is counting on this, even though a lot of their creators are flocking to the independent publishers. Now, why are they doing this? IPs. Apparently, when AT&T first bought DC Comics and went into the office, at least as legend has it, the first thing they said is, why are we still printing these books? Well, the answer is IPs. Now, how does this become important? Well, because comics don't make nearly as much money as you think they do. In November of last year, 2019, depending on what year you see this, the top-selling book was this one, New Mutants #1. It sold 138,000 copies. Now, it had a cover price of $4.99. That means Marvel Comics was selling it to distributors somewhere around $2. Okay, 138,000 times $2, that's 270 some odd thousand. Sounds okay, right? But out of that $2 a book that they basically were charging, they have to pay the writer, the artist, the colorist, the letterer, the editor, designer, a cover artist, a senior editor, editor-in-chief. In fact, there were 13 people listed in the credits for this book. 13, see? Read it. That's a lot of people who each have to take a piece, and that's not even counting the cost of paper and the cost to print the books. So the bottom line is, what did Marvel make out of this book? I have no idea. 100,000? 50,000? Whatever it was chump change for Disney, a company that's used to making millions and millions of dollars off of their movies. So we're back to the same question. Why are they still printing these things? Because IPs. Now, for those of you who don't know, I think most of you do, IP stands for intellectual property. Where does it come from? Right here. It's an idea. It's a cool character that somebody thought up. So case in point, Interballistic Missile Mouse. Yeah, going to be awesome. It's the story of an orphaned mouse, an orphaned rodent who actually also happens to be really good at science, and he gets caught up in this secret government project designing missiles, and he's trapped inside, and next thing you know, he's got powers that can control missiles. He can launch them, he can direct them, he can do whatever he wants with missiles. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Dave, that sounds like you just made that up 15 minutes ago. And you'd be right. But scoff though you may, what about when you see that Bleeding Cool article that says, ooh, Interballistic Missile Mouse is in one of those side issues of Death Metal that you didn't buy, and Warner Brothers is thinking about making it into a kids animated series. Yeah, you're not scoffing now, are you? Now you gotta have that book, but it's going for $120 on eBay. You see where we're going with this? So now, am I making a lot of money off of Interballistic Missile Mouse? No, because it was in a DC book. And if it's in a DC book, DC Comics owns it. That goes for all of them. Batman, yeah, created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger, and a bunch of other people. Spider-Man was created, as everybody knows, by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. And Jack Kirby was in the room somewhere, so he also had something to do with it. So who owns those incredible characters? AT&T and Disney. That's who owns them, not Stan Lee, not Bob Kane, not the estates of any of those people. The reason for this is something that was called work for hire. Now, work for hire was contracts that all creators signed when they worked for any of these companies. And it essentially said that they were creating these characters on behalf of Marvel Comics and on behalf of DC Comics. It's kind of like if somebody comes to your house and builds a goldfish pond in your backyard. They're the ones that do the work. They're the ones that create the goldfish pond. But you own the goldfish pond when they're done because you pay them for their work and they leave and it belongs to you now. But the thing is, that goldfish pond is worth a few $100s. Batman is worth untold millions of dollars. It's a completely different situation. So yeah, creators started realizing that they were giving away a gold mine. But this is the way the industry worked for decades, until about the mid-1970s. And that's when creators decided, hey, what if I didn't publish the big two and I just did it myself? I would own it all. And so we saw the first couple of releases, in particular ElfQuest by Wendy and Richard Penny. They owned it themselves. They published it themselves. They took all the risk. Same thing with Cerebus by Dave Sim. He published it himself, all 300 issues completely. He owns it. It belongs lock, stock, and barrel to him. That changed the comic world kind of forever. And in the 80s, we saw a huge explosion of creator-owned books. And this carried into the 90s with companies like Image and then all these other, all the way up to Boom and different companies that published a lot of creator-owned work. Despite all this, by the time the 90s were over and the great comic crash of the mid-90s happened, we were back to, yes, we had more companies, but ultimately it was the big two that really drove the comic industry. And that's kind of where we are today. And comic fans are insanely loyal. People who buy Marvel comics, we put them in one section because that's all they want is Marvel comics. Same thing goes for DC. But it doesn't make sense. It's like, hey, that Joe Hill's a really good writer, but I only buy books published by Random House. Do you see the insanity behind this? People should follow creators, not necessarily publishers. So now we're in a pandemic, and the world is absolutely changing, and your local comic shop, assuming it survives, is going to be changing as well. So how can we make these changes positive? Let's look outside the big two. Honestly, that's where some of the most vibrant work being done today is. So you're probably saying, well, Dave, if I'm not going to buy books from DC and Marvel, what could I buy? And I'm really, really glad you asked that. Let's talk about books like The Goon, Eric Powell's creation. Awesome book, comes out still on a pretty regular basis. Or one of my absolute favorites that actually goes all the way back to the 80s, Matt Wagner's Grindel. Now, Matt Wagner publishes two books in particular on a sporadic basis, Mage and Grindel. They are both absolutely fantastic. Go into your local shop, look for the graphic novel section, and buy all of these. They are stunning. You will become a comic fan all over again. Speaking of Joe Hill, Lock and Key. Now, if you just saw the Netflix series, which was actually really well done, read the book. It's outstanding. And honestly, it will make you love comics all over again. Those are indie published books. But now, the company that really has kind of been the hotbed for creator-owned work lately has been Image. Now, Image actually acts as if it were Random House. They're a publisher. They're a publisher for other creators to do their work. They own it. Image simply serves as the conduit to get them to your local shop. And we get books like Saga from Brian K. Vaughan, also Paper Girls from Brian K. Vaughan. Brian K. Vaughan is a tremendously popular writer that's really getting a solid following. One of my absolute favorites, Monstrous. Monstrous is a brilliant work, beautifully drawn, expertly crafted. It's really, really good. Far better, frankly, than I think anything the big two are publishing. Also, Lazarus. Lazarus is one of my absolute favorites. Now, it's written by Greg Rucka, who does a lot of writing for the big two. He's good. But like a lot of creators, he saves his best work for the stuff he owns. And that would be this. So, guys, that's kind of where we're at now. The pandemic is changing the entire world. And that does not exclude your local comic shop. Your local comic shop wants to keep the art form of comics going, without question. And there's so much vibrant work out there that too many people are not seeing because it doesn't have a brand name attached to it. So what can you do to support the art of comics? Because I know you all want to. Think outside the box. And in this case, the box is created by Marvel and DC. Outside the box, you will find a host of wonderful creator-owned work where they are putting their heart and soul into what they write and what they draw. Not only will you discover really good stuff that will rekindle your passion for this art form, you'll help keep your local comic shop open. And that way, when it comes out, the big plans for Interballistic Missile Mouse, your local comic shop will have a copy, hopefully all 14 variants, including that 1 in 500 variant that explodes when you open it, because that one's going to be really rare. Guys, thanks for coming back. I know half of you forgot I even still had this channel, and you're like, wait, I was still subscribed to that? We are, so don't unsubscribe now, because maybe in a month or two I'll have more of these. If you have suggestions, feel free to send them my way. I do read all that stuff. As I can get my schedule worked out, I will do a lot more of these. Guys, I appreciate it. Keep reading comics. Keep supporting your local shop wherever it may be. that's one area that brand loyalty is not a bad thing. And guys, whatever it is you're going to do today, make it the best you can possibly do it. Thanks so much for joining us.